What is the importance for the media of keeping the narratives of human suffering and Ukrainian hard-won dignity in the middle of the war, whether on the front lines or in the diaspora?
Hello, Scott. Thank you so much for such an important question. From my perspective of someone who works in communications and government and media field, and as a committed person and passionate about advocating for Ukrainian culture and history and heritage, both at home and abroad, the question of narrative is not secondary to the war, it is central to it. The media narratives shape how conflicts are understood, remembered, and acted upon. In Ukraine's case, keeping human suffering and hard-won dignity at the center of coverage is essential to preserving the truth of the war beyond military developments or diplomatic statements, which are often quite polished and don't always reflect the true reality. Unfortunately, as someone also grounded in international relations, accurately aware that the war are often interpreted through the lenses of power and geopolitical consequence, and while those frameworks matter, they are incomplete and obviously without the human dimension that gives the moral weight, which is quite unimportant in such case. Unfortunately, the human suffering and the responsibility and that is thoughtfully reported anchors policy debates and international responses in a live reality. It also resists the abstraction of war into statistics and reinforces the understanding that every decision, sanctions, aid packaging, negotiations had consequences for real people with real lives, which media covers perfectly, even sometimes a bit extra doors. And yeah, that is quite important because it gives live stories of live people, and real average people. That's also important. And especially from frontline communities to families that were forced into displacement, those stories remind global audiences that endurance is not theoretical. It is daily, intimate, and costly. And for media, sustaining attention to the suffering is like essential obligation, basically, particularly as the war stretches on and the risk of normalizing grows, I would say, with every year, considering current circumstances. At this time, I believe it is equally vital for media to foreground Ukrainian dignity, because dignity is not incidental to this war. It is essential. It is one of its defining features. And Ukraine's resistance is not only in military, it is also historical. It's also in a part of the Ukrainian spirit. As now we can say that, and especially as an advocate for the arts and the heritage, I see how cultural expressions and the memory and identity have become forms of resilience and quite defensive, and whether through language, music, visual art, and any form of art or preservation of historical narratives, Ukraine continues to assert who they are, even under existential threat. That's why media covers that too, and which is essential and important, because even during the war, the art, the culture, the heritage should be present, even in a more stronger way, and show how rich the culture is. And through art, you can show that we can survive, we can stand. And for Ukrainians abroad, media narratives play a cultural critical role. They connect to diaspora, to country, through those media articles, through those personal stories. And highlighting dignity alongside suffering ensures that displaced Ukrainians are seen not as passive victims of war, but as a cultural ambassadors, civic actors, and participants in Ukraine's global presence, which is also quite important. So ultimately, for the media, maintaining those narratives is about responsibility to truth and to history, because the wars will eventually end. The history will be written by those who will win. But the narratives, even in the media, they will stay in people's hearts and people's mind, and will go from generation to generation. And as someone deeply interested in how Ukraine is perceived internationally, I see the preservation of those stories as a safe ground against distortion, fatigue, and forgetting about such a war, such a big war in Europe. They affirm why Ukraine's struggle matters, not only for territorial integrity, but regional stability, for Europe's stability, and for the defense of human dignity, cultural survivor, national survivor, and the right of people to define themselves. So I would say that's what's important, and media reflects it through normal, real life, real people stories that happen. That's why it's important.